Good evening and welcome to our Genesis study. I'm incredibly happy and excited and glad that you decided to tune in with us. We got a couple of folks in the building. That always makes me happy. And we are in Genesis chapter 32 this evening. Now, if you remember last week, we spent a good bit of time talking about Laban and Jacob's relationship, how Laban has charged full speed ahead to try to catch Jacob as Jacob has felt wronged, and Laban feels justified because he's thought of Jacob as part of his property, and they basically had it out, and Jacob had met his limit, and he calls out Jacob last week. Now Jacob has finally, and when we get to this chapter, he is finally on the road. Laban is no longer chasing him. They have made this covenant, and now Jacob is on the way to Esau. Now, y'all recall a couple of chapters ago, Jacob and Esau, they kind of had a feud. You know, if whether you learned it with me or you learned it in Sunday school, you know, Jacob and Esau, they weren't really friends. You know, they were twins. They shared the womb together, but they didn't quite get along because, well, Jacob means trickster and Esau was interested in everything but God. And so this birthright that their father had to give that passed down to them, although Esau was the firstborn, Jacob was the one that was concerned with godly things. And Isaac, their dad, was concerned with Esau because they were alike. They were similar. And so they have had this feud, and now we are 20 years later. Now, they've been angry and upset. Now, I know a lot of us have family issues, and sometimes family issues go a little while. But can you imagine being angry at somebody who you shared your mother's room with for 20 years? 20 years have gone apart. They've been separated, as their mother told them, that until Esau forgets what you did. Now, if somebody stole, close to $30 million from me, I don't think $20 million, I don't think 20 years, I don't think some space was going to make a difference. I don't think that none of that was going to make a difference. But his mama says, go away, Esau will forget, and then you can come back, we can be one big happy family. Well, bad news has happened. Mama has passed away. And Jacob is on the way back to Isaac, but before he gets back to Isaac, he's got to go back and see Esau. Because Esau's not staying with mama and daddy anymore because he got them two pagan wives and they ain't like them. And so since they didn't like them, he got the two pagan wives and the one wife that really was kind of pagan, but she was kind of related to them. And so he done made this whole mess, hodgepodge, and he just messing up the bloodline. So he's not living with them. He's staying over in Seir, and now Jacob is on the way to meet Esau. Now, y'all know I kind of liked Abraham, but I was hard on Abraham. And I kind of liked Isaac, but I was hard on him. I really don't like Jacob. I really, really don't like Jacob. And tonight, I want to show you why I don't like Jacob. But I want to also say this, just because I don't like Jacob don't mean that God is not hungry after his soul. And so we're going to see that in the text today. We're going to see that in the text today. And I want us to dive in, as always. I want you to be like the Berean Jews in Acts. I want you to hear everything that I say. Hear everything that I say, chew on it, digest it, but then I want you to go home. Read the Bible yourself and come to your own conclusions. Because if you trust what Minister Cole says, what are you going to say when you get to heaven? And maybe Minister Cole says something wrong. Now, I'm not going to try to say anything wrong, but I want you to be like the Berean Jews, receive the word with all readiness of heart, and then go study for yourself to show yourself approved. Here we go. Genesis 32. I've got the King James open and the English Standard Version over. We're going to start in the let's start in the English Standard Version. It says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Now, I want to pause there because the angels of God meet him. Jacob is on his way, and the first verse, after he's gotten free from Laban, is the angels of God are there. Now, Jacob has had this shifty, shady relationship with faith in God. God makes him a promise after he sees Jacob's ladder in the middle of the wilderness, and he says, well, if you do these things. Like he has not made a declaration of faith. He says, if you do these things, then I'll be obedient. If you do these things, then I'll go and I'll follow you. But I don't really believe you are who you say you are because everybody must be like me. And I would tell you this, that our personalities shape our worldview. Remember, Jacob is shifty and shady. His name literally means heel grabber because he grabs his brother's heel, but his whole life he's been trying to manipulate things. He's been trying to move things and make people do what he wants. And so his worldview is, if I'm this way, and I'm with me 24/7. Everybody else must be shifty and shady. And so if I have this encounter with this God who's saying he's omnipotent, who's saying he's the God of my grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac, and I know they've been blessed, but how am I supposed to believe somebody if everybody's like me? And so he has this shifty, shady relationship with God. And so he goes on his way, and God encounters him again. God comes and shows up again. And so what I want us to wrap our heads around is, even if we miss it the first time, even if we only get a revelation of what God is trying to do the first time, God will pursue you again. And he'll pursue you again till you get 100% of the lesson. There's often in life, in school, if you made a B, you passed. I remember being in college, and I had a whole lot of friends that said D's get degrees. And you know, D's, they do get degrees. You know, D's get degrees and so do C's. But that's a 70%, 60% comprehension rate. You see what I'm saying? But God will chase you down until you get 100% of it, until you understand it. That's why often we'll be in life and we'll feel like that storm just keeps coming back. I dated this one, and then the same thing happened 5 years later after I date the next girl. Then the same thing happens after you date the next person. And it just keeps happening over and over and over again until you have a heart shift. I can talk to you because that happened to me in real life. I had prayed the same prayer for 13 years. Lord, I want companionship. Send me somebody. Please, God, please, God, please, God. And every year it would be all about, well, who did I talk to this year? I would go back reading my things. And finally I said, Lord, if you don't ever send nobody, that's cool. It'll just be me and you. Very next year, I got the thing I had been praying for. And so what I want you to see is God will pursue you until you not only get a piece of it, until you get all of it. So the angels of God met him, and he gets this wonderful revelation of God's presence. And in verse 2, it reads this way. I'm back in the King James, and it says, and when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, that is, two hosts or camps. So let's sit here for a second. He said, he comes in, he has this encounter, and he says, when Jacob saw them, he has this awareness that these are God's spirits. Now, remember, he was living in Laban's house for 20 years. Laban was worshiping other gods. He was doing divination. He was all up in that witchcraft stuff. Like he was burning the sage. He had the crystals, all the things. Like he was out there. And so he's been familiar with other spirits and how the other spirits present themselves in the earth, right? You know, some people, they just like, oh, well, I'm spiritual, but they're not really sure what spirit they're dealing with. And so they're over there hanging out with evil spirits, talking about I'm spiritual, trying to say that we're the same. And baby, we're not the same. And so the truth is, Jacob is aware of spirits. And not only is he aware of spirits, he's aware that this is God's host. But then he names the place Mahanaim. Now, Mahanaim means that it is two camps. So he shows up and he's aware that there are two teams that have arrived. So this place is Mahanaim. He's got two camps. In other words, God is showing him, hey, I know you're not sure of me, but let me show you how I can show up. Now, I want you to remember this. God sends a host. He sends an army to go and greet him. This is the first spiritual encounter of the chapter. It's not the only one. He goes and he sends an army of angels. Now, I want you to remember, we're a little lower than the angels. But the angels' job is to serve us and to serve God. Not in equal capacity, but that's their job. Their job is to serve. So God sends an army of angels to show Jacob that I'm God. You need an army? You over here, you nervous? I got an army. I own all the cattle on all the hills. Every angel in the universe. You know, I had to fire a third of them, but hey, all of them are up under subjection to me. So he sends an army, and Jacob is aware of them, and he has this awareness of the spirit. And so Jacob then, now watch this. Jacob has an encounter with the supernatural. He has an encounter with God's army. The very next verse, the Bible goes, and it makes no sense to me, because it says, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commands them, saying, thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob said thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent them to tell my Lord that I might find grace in your sight. So basically, he says, yeah, I just met God's army, but that's cool. I got to handle this all by myself. All right, y'all go over there and go see about Esau. Go send all this stuff, all these things that I've accumulated in my own wisdom and in my own thinking, all this wealth that's in my house, and you go see my brother and check his temperature and find out whether he gonna try to kill me or not. Yeah, I know I met his army over here. I know God's army was over here. That was just a coincidence. There's no reason for us to put any allegiance or any strength or any title over there. We're gonna have to handle this storm by ourselves. Do y'all see the conflict there? He's had a spiritual experience. And how many of us come out of worship experiences or out of prayer meetings and we have an encounter with God? I mean, a real encounter with God, weeping, and you feel him and he's spoken. He said something so boldly to you. And the very next day we're back to, what am I going to do? I got to figure this out. And all of a sudden, we have found ourselves in contrast to what God is called or ordained, because he showed his hand. He said, look, you need an army? I got one. You need something? I got it. And I want you to notice that God shows his hand before Jacob ever comes up with a plan. He shows his hand to him. He said, like, you need something, I got it. Y'all know that's just as crazy as my daddy having a car. My car is broke down. And I called my daddy. My daddy said, hey, you know we got an extra car at the house. And me going to the dealership and getting in debt, and I'm already at my capacity. I'm already too deep. But my daddy said, hey, you know, whatever you need, I got your back. But my pride getting in the way. My pride being so loud that I've just made up in my mind I've got to handle it on my own. I don't need any help. I got this. Don't worry about it. And so he goes on, he says, verse 5, I've already read it. He says, I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and women servants, and I've sent them to tell my Lord that I might find grace in thy sight. Now, I don't want you to make, I told y'all at the beginning I don't really like Jacob, but I don't want to get it twisted. Jacob wasn't saying all this because he wanted to show off to Esau. Like this wasn't a rivalry thing. He's basically saying, look, I'm coming because I'm not asking you for anything. I know I took some stuff from you last time. And so I'm a wealthy man. I got my own stuff. And so I'm just coming to talk to you as my brother. So I've got all these things so that I'm not going to be in your pocket. And so he makes this statement to him, but yet and still, what are we looking at? I want us to see this. He's still talking about what he's accumulated. He's still focused on what he's done. Y'all know, I got caught up a couple of years ago, and the Holy Spirit convicted me real bad, real bad. I was probably my 7th, 8th year at Auburn, and I was working on degree number 4, and the Lord, by way of my friend, said, are you trying to make a monument to yourself? And see, I had gotten so caught up in this culture that the more degrees I have, the more worth I have. And so if I can get 3 undergraduate degrees and I can get in this master's program, it'll set me up to get this PhD. And the truth is that I had the gifts and the talents to do it all without the degrees. But I was so focused on getting the names, the numbers, and the letters in front and behind my name that all I could focus on was I got to get this one, I want to get this one. I'm going to make sure that I walk all 3 on that day. So they're going to do marathon graduations, and I'm going to make sure I do all these things. And I had made up in my mind that it was all about what I could accomplish. And there was some conviction that came by way of my friend via the Holy Spirit that told me, hey, that's not God. You should have came down here, did what you had to do in 4. You was done with the first degree in 4. You could have been out of here. But how many times do we get so focused on achievement that we're so focused on achievement that we miss what God is telling us to do? We're so focused on putting things behind our name. What are we doing to glorify his name? What are we doing that would bring honor to his name? Because we weren't created to give ourselves a name. We were created to give his name praise. And as we come into the body of Christ, we're then created to bring other people closer to his name. But if it's all about me, how many followers does Reverend Kojo have? How can we get more followers? That was another conviction point, the whole Instagram thing. But we're going to move on and get back in the word. Here we go. Verse 6. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee with 400 men. Now, 400 men is a common militia number. Like that's really common in that day. For the wealthy folks, they normally had about 400 servants, and so the 400 servants was enough to raise an army if somebody decided to come take from them. But I want you to see what this did to Jacob. Jacob, who has had this encounter with God, God has shown him that he has an army, that he can fight his battles for him, that he's going to be taken care of, who has decided that he's going to turn to his own ways and his own faculties, now finds out that his brother Esau is on the way to meet him with 400 men. And I'm sure he hears that 400 number and said, crap, he is coming to come and kill me, because he promised he was going to kill me. He said it. And I thought maybe after 20 years and a whole bunch of kids, maybe we could settle our differences. And so he begins to have a mental breakdown because he's convinced. Now, he don't have, it's not verified. The only thing that's verified is that 400 folks are coming with him. So he's convinced that all this stuff is about to fall apart. He starts freaking out. And he really didn't have many good reasons to think good of Esau. You know, Esau wasn't the most forgiving person. He wasn't the most spiritual person. He didn't have any reasons to think well of Esau. So verse 7 reads it this way. He says, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the men who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 bands. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Now, y'all remember last chapter when Laban comes running at full speed ahead, catching up with Jacob and all of his family. And Laban brings with him a militia. And he's angry and all these things. Jacob said, oh, no, we're not going to do this, playboy. We're not doing this today. We're not going here because you have done me wrong. He stands boldly before Laban. Esau is coming, and now he is crumbling. And he's crumbling because he knows he has done Esau wrong. He doesn't crumble before Laban because he's sick of Laban. He said, I'm justified and everything has got to work out. But he's afraid here because even if he's not sure of God's providence, he's bought into this you reap what you sow. And since he's bought into this you reap what you sow, he says, this is not going to work out good for me. And then Esau was the one that liked to be outside fighting and stuff. You know, I like to be in there cleaning my fingernails. Like, I ain't really trying to fight with you, boy. And so he's in this predicament. So he's greatly afraid and distressed. And then verse 8 reads it this way. He said, if Esau come to one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. Now let's go back to verse 1 and 2 again. God shows him, I got a whole army. The Bible even says, he calls it Mahanaim because he says, I've got 2 armies. So God is showing him, I've got 2 armies. And Jacob says, okay, we'll divide my people into 2 camps. God shows him that I've got 2 armies that are at your disposal. They're here to serve you and to be for your good pleasure. I've already made promises to you. Just use the 2 armies that I have. God has shown him this first. But he says, no, let's split everybody into 2 camps. And we're going to lean to my understanding because I'm the wise one here. He's gotten this in his mind that it's only been me. All this time, it's just been me. I had to figure it out when I left mom and daddy's house. I had to figure out how to get there. When I saw Rachel, I had to figure out how to get her daddy to give me to her. And then when he cheated me, I worked for that. And I want to push us because working is good. And I don't want anybody watching at home to think that working is not good because working is great. Please get a job. But working is good. But what I also want you to see is that if you put your works above your faith, it will never work. It'll never work. And we live in a culture where we're so focused on what we can do and what someone did that we miss the whole realm of faith that says if God said, and it looks stupid or crazy, I've got to trust that it's going to work. Because in my mind, it doesn't matter whether I rationalize all day long or I sit there and I write it all out. If I spend my time trying to focus on what I can do, it won't work. or I'll come up short. Okay, any comments so far? All right, let's keep moving. Now, he said, makes a statement, if Esau come to one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. But I want you to also see this, that Jacob had every reason to believe that God was going to protect him. God has already given him a promise in a few chapters ago. At the beginning of this chapter, he's shown him that he's got two bands of armies. He has this wrong fear because he's had this remarkable divine visitation. He has seen God. He has experienced God. God came to him on his way to Laban's house. He is not like he hasn't had an experience with God. You know, a lot of people don't believe God because they've never experienced God. A lot of people have never come in and never felt the presence of God. They've never prayed and God did something. That's not his story. And so I want to challenge somebody who's experienced God. You know, one of the things that has always bothered me in ministry, both here and in Auburn, is when somebody I know had some word on the inside, leaves the faith. It's never really bothered me when somebody leaves and they were never really bought in. You know, they came and they sat on their phone, or they came to youth church and they kind of like, you know, didn't pay attention, or they fell asleep. It didn't really bother me that much. But what would bother me is when somebody who had a little word on the inside, who had read their Bible and participated and had, you know, a reasonable prayer life, when they left the faith, it always bothered me because I'm like, how could you have an experience with God? I mean, touch him, feel him, you know, sometimes taste. Like, how could you taste the glory of his presence and leave? Like, I understand leaving. The people of the church had that thought every week. But what can you do? How can you leave God after you've experienced God? So I couldn't understand Jacob here because he had this fear. But in splitting his company, Jacob uses his wisdom, human wisdom, and schemes to prepare for Esau's coming. And God has already shown him that he has everything that he needs. Okay, verse 9. And Jacob said, "O God of my father." Now he sounds good so far. You know, finally it's the first time we really see him pray. He says, "O God of my father Abraham, and the God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said unto me, return unto thy country and thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast shown unto thy servant, for with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, and he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou said, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude." Now his prayer, if I was teaching somebody how to pray, that's how I would tell them to pray. I would be like, you know, you go in there, you talk to God, you call him by his name, and then you remind him of what he said. You remind him of what he said. You humble yourself enough to tell him how he's been good, and tell him what he said. His prayer sounds good. His prayer sounds effectual. But then what happens next tells me that his heart is not matching what his prayer has said. Because and before we even read about Jacob wrestling with the Lord, y'all know everybody loves it, and we love to talk well about Jacob wrestling with the Lord. But what if I told you Jacob was wrong? And Jacob was lacking faith. What if I told you that Jacob's holding on until he blessed him was an arrogant answer to being defeated? Because I think a lot of us like to twist God's arm. We pray, Lord, I just want you to make this thing work. Please, God, I need it to work. And God said, I told you to go left 2 years ago. I told you to go on 2 years ago, and you still over here asking me to do this thing. I'll give it to you, but it's not my best. I give it to you, but it's not what I ordained. And so before we read the text, I want you to remove your preconceptions about him wrestling with the Lord all night, because we sing songs about it in church. People get up and they'd make the declaration, I wrestled with the Lord all night long, and he heard me, and I wasn't going to let go till he blessed me. And it sounds great, but in context, it's not good. Now, I want to give you a disclaimer. Faith is great. All of us, every Bible-believing Christian ought to have a multitude of faith. You ought to ask the Lord and believe that when you prayed for something, that it is yours when you prayed it. That's the law of faith. You should believe that faith is the substance of the things you hope for. You should. I want you to have faith like Abraham, Isaac, not so much like Jacob. I want you to have faith like Enoch and Noah. I want you to have faith like all of these great pillars of the Bible. But I also want you to be so aware that sometimes our models come from our brokenness and not out of the whole picture that God has ordained. Here we go. All right. Verse 13. And he said, and he lodged there that same night and took from that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats and 200 ewes and 20 rams and 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hands of his servant, every drove by itself, and said unto his servants, pass over before me, and put a space between me and the drove. Now, I'm going to just pause there, and I wasn't going to pause there, but I'm going to pause there because I can do that. That he puts this space between them, and he sends them ahead. I want you to see what happens, that if Jacob believed that he was right, or he believed that God was going to do what he said he was going to do, Jacob would have been in the front of this caravan. Jacob wouldn't have sent all the women and the servants ahead and been at the end. He wouldn't have done that. Instead, what Jacob does is he sends everybody ahead of him, and he's in the back. He's hanging out because he's afraid of how his brother's going to react. And he's kind of hoping that maybe if I send women and children, he'll be like merciful. And if I send gifts, he'll be merciful. And, maybe by the time he gets to me, it'll be all good. Coward move. And so he goes, but I want you to see this, that the way that you move, in whether it's business, whether it's relationships, whether it's whatever, the way that you move depicts the state of your heart. If you are faithful in work, or you're faithful in the way that you serve in church, well, how many times have I heard people like, the Lord know my heart, and you ain't been to church, and we've been open for a year and a half. Like, the Lord knows my heart. They know I got stuff. We have this posture or this idea in our head, but it's in contrast to what God has ordained, or even what we think we are. And so the truth about where we are spiritually or in the earth is not in the same place that we are spiritually. And so we have this idea about ourselves. My dad, I'm going to put him out here. My dad has been asking me lately, he's like, am I mean? And my daddy, everybody believes he is the friendliest person on the face of the earth, right? Yeah. He believes he's the friendliest person on the face of the earth. I'm like, no, you're not mean. You just, you're direct. You're direct. And your directness, sometimes people can't handle directness. And so he's asked me that in the last couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 times. He's like, am I mean? Because sometimes our perception of self and the way that the rest of the world perceives us is different. And so I believe Jacob, trying to split his family up, is thinking he's leading his family and he's being noble and I'm being wise and I'm putting everything together. I believe he's thinking all that. But the way that he's handling it is showing that his heart has guilt. And Spurgeon, the great theologian, says that Shakespeare, not Spurgeon, I'm sorry. Shakespeare says that conscience makes a great, what did he say? I was thinking about it earlier. What did he say? He said conscience makes a, whatever Shakespeare said. It was about the conscience. It was about the conscience. He was saying that your conscience basically depicts a true mirror of how we behave. And a lot of times I think we think that our thoughts and our conscience are the same thing, and that's not always the case. All right, let's keep going before I dig myself into a hole that I can't get out of. All right. And then he says in verse 17, and he says, and And he commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, he says, who art thou? And whither thou goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they are thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau. Behold also, he is behind us. Okay. And so he commanded he the second and the third, and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner shall you speak unto Esau when you find him. So I'm going to send y'all in waves. And as each of y'all go, y'all give the gifts. Butter them up. Make them feel good. Maybe by the time I get there, it'll be all right. Then he says in verse 19, he says, and he commanded this, verse 20, he said, say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the presence that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. I will appease him and present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. Jacob seems to be a great example of what when all else fails, pray. Prayer was his last solution. So he's prayed this prayer, and even after he's prayed this prayer, he's still leaning to his own understanding. He's already made up in his mind what he wants to do. And so if Jacob really trusted God, he would, again, like I said, he'd be at the front. Now, verse 21, he says, so went the presence over before him, and he himself lodged that night in the company. And so the present went over before him. Now, this gift is a good example of the way we should trust in our ability to do things and make things happen apart from trusting God. In other words, we shouldn't. So he sends the gifts ahead out of fear. He sends the gifts ahead because he wants his brother, he thinks he can buy his brother's affection. Since I've taken my brother's earthly goods, maybe I can buy them back from him. Maybe I can buy his affection. We hadn't really been cool because we weren't really cool beforehand, but we were definitely not okay now. So he wants him to buy back his affection. But then I want you to see this. This is where the text turns. He says, so he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over to the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over to the brook and sent over what he had. And Jacob was left alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Now, I want you to see this. The text does not say that Jacob wrestled with a man. You know, we like to say that Jacob wrestled with the angel all night long. No. The text says, and Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. Now, God has been trying to get his attention this entire time. God has been hungry to get his attention. He wants Jacob fully. I want Jacob's whole attention. I want everything. I want all of you, Jacob. So he gets him alone. He lets Jacob do his own thing. And God shows up in angel form. This is what we call a Christophany, or when Jesus shows up in the Old Testament concealed. Jesus shows up, God shows up in the flesh, and he begins to wrestle with Jacob. Jacob did not pick this fight. God picks the fight. Jacob doesn't pick the fight. God picks the fight. And I want to submit to you that some of the things that are going on in your life are not because you did it. It's because God is picking a fight because he's trying to work some stuff out of you. And a lot of us we're like, why is this happening? Everything's just falling apart. I feel like I'm fighting here, I'm fighting there, I'm fighting here. And God is picking the fight, waiting on you to give in. Because it's been all about what I can do. I did this, I got this, I started this, I got this business, I got this ministry, I did here, I'm over here, I'm doing this. And God is like, what about me? What about my plan for you? What about what I've called you to do? I've been trying to get your attention. I tried to get your attention when you was out in the wilderness 20 years ago. I've been trying to get your attention while you was while you was having dreams about goats and she-goats. I tried to get your attention beforehand when I gave you my army and you didn't want it. So that's cool. I'm going to take everybody away. Send everybody ahead. Go and work in your own wisdom. And it's going to be me and you. And we're going to see who can stand the rain or stay in the ring with me. Now, but this is how stubborn Jacob is. You're fighting God. And you keep fighting. Jacob's like, he must not know who I am. I made this. All that wealth, I did that. I left the house without the birthright. It was promised to me, but I didn't leave here. I made my wealth from nothing. Laban treated me funny. It's cool. I done built a whole big old family. Man want to fight me in the middle of the wilderness? Cool. I fight him. Still arrogant. Still have a haughty heart. And so he says Jacob was left there alone until the breaking of day. And Jacob has this proud self-reliance, a fleshy scheming. God came to take back his attitude by force. And then in verse 25, it reads this way. It says, and when the man saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So I've always kind of struggled here. Because it's weird, because it insinuates that God doesn't win. Because it says when he realized that he did not prevail against him, he grabs the hollow of his thigh. But I want you to see what Jesus has here that Jacob doesn't have is this supernatural power to usurp dominance. And so I want you to see this, that he wrestles with him in the flesh all night long. And a lot of times our wrestling, God will come down to our level. And he'll wrestle with us until we're just a little tired, but we can still keep pushing. That's what burnout is. He wrestles with them on his level. Now, God could have shown up as Hulk and hit him one time and he'd been knocked out. No, he lets him wrestle. He wrestles with him. He comes down to his strength level and he wrestles with him all night long. He wrestles with him saying, will he give in? He wrestles with him hoping that he'll have this idea, have this understanding that maybe I can't do this on my own. God did offer me an army. But instead of doing that, he wrestles all night long. He wrestles all night long. And this fight progresses. You know, it seems Jacob was somewhat evenly matched, but the match was only matched in appearance because God was holding back on him. And then 26, he says, and then the man said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. Now, when he says to him, let me go, because the day breaketh, this is Jesus being kind to him. Because, you know, no man can look upon his face, thus should he die. So he says, let me go. I'd hate for you to have to die here. Got so many plans for you. Got so much for you. I have not seen, ear not has not heard, nor has it entered into the hearts of men what I have planned for you. Let me go. I would hate for you to die here. But I want us to get on this level because a lot of times as young professionals and young adults, we think we're invincible and we can do it. And so we keep wrestling with God, and God said, go left and you're going right. He said, I've got some blessings for you a mile down the road if you'll go left. If you go right, it's going to take you 40 years. If you do it my way, we'll get there next week. I want you to think about the children of Israel. They get out of Egypt. They said that should have been a 2-week journey. They should have walked and got to Canaan and been living, sipping on milk and honey, and in 2 weeks. Those folks was in the wilderness for 40 years because of their stubbornness. Their stubborn hearts had them in a state that said, why we can't just have Pharaoh's food? Why you had to take us out of here? Just would not be grateful. And so Jacob, back to the text, Jacob, their ancestor, Jacob is here. And Jesus is being kind to him. He says, let me go. The day is breaking. But I want you to see this, that Jacob holds on desperately because he does not want to die at the hands of his brother. Now, he doesn't realize that he's at the hands of God. And I think that happens with a lot of us because we don't want to be embarrassed by people. We don't want people to think a certain way of us, but we don't really care what God thinks. And then we cover it up with statements like, only God can judge me. We covered up with those statements like, only God can judge me. And y'all, that's a bad thing. Like if the only person that can judge you is God, you are in a bad place. Like a really just, and y'all can be mad at me. But the truth is you're at a bad place. If God is the only person that can pass judgment on you, now, church folk, I'm not saying be judgy. Because I do know we have some seniors that watch this. I'm not telling you to go and tell somebody. I'm not telling you to do that. But what I am saying is that he's at this place, right, where he doesn't care about pleasing God because he's worried about Esau. So he's realized that I've been working with this guy. It doesn't matter. See what I do, and I'm hanging on here. There must be something supernatural about him. Now, do y'all remember just a few verses ago when he encounters heaven's hosts that he realizes that that's the heavenly beings? This man has encountered Jesus, God himself, in the flesh, wrestled with him all night long. And it wasn't until that he said, let me go because day is about to break, that he realizes he'd been fighting God. And I want to say this again. I know I've been beating this dead horse, but I got a feeling somebody's at home watching. And I want you to know that a lot of times you'll be wrestling with God and think that you're wrestling against the world. Or you'll be saying it's the devil. Or it's my boss. Or it's my manager. And you've just been wrestling against God. And here's the thing about wrestling with God is he's not going to let you quit till you learn the lesson. And so you'll be wrestling for the next 30 years. And I don't know about you, but I want my stuff now. Like I do. I want it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So if I got to get in line and submit and give God my will, that's what I'm going to do. If I gotta go and I got to go do stuff I don't want to, that's what I'm going to do. Because I've been in situations where I was struggling for no reason. And newsflash, it ain't no fun. Here we go. Let's keep going. We are almost done. Actually, I want to go here really quickly because a lot of people talk about I will not let you go until you bless me. So he's not dictating terms to God. And that's a bonus. You know, I'm going to be fair to him here in the text. He's not dictating terms to him. I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. He's not saying you're going to bless me here. He's basically saying, look, I'm desperate. I'm at the end of me. He's making this, I'm at the end of me. Like, I done wrestled with you all night. I done lost. My family is gone. They about to encounter my brother. I don't know if he going to kill him. Like, I don't know if he going to kill Rachel, all my boys. You know, they don't ever mention Dinah. I don't know if he's going to take all this stuff from me. I don't know what's going to happen. But I sense that there's something supernatural about you. You might just be God, but I don't think so. You might be a man. But there's something about you. I need you to bless me. And out of his desperation, he humbles himself. Now, y'all know there's a verse that says, humble yourself before the Lord. Y'all know why that verse is there? Because either you will humble yourself before God or God will humiliate you. And I don't know about y'all, but I really prefer to be humble and not be humiliated because humiliation sucks. And so I want you to see this, that he comes to the end of himself in a humiliating moment. Because to get him to let go, because he refuses when he says, let me go. God is being nice. Let me go. And he dislocates his hip. And for the rest of his life, he walks with a limp. For the rest of his life, he has an impediment. For the rest of his life, he feels the fight he had with God. For the rest of his days. And I want you to see this. This could have been avoided. This could have been avoided. At the beginning of the chapter, God gave him a scapegoat. Gave him an army. But because he was stubborn, because he had figured it out himself, because he was so stuck in his own ways, he had to go the hard way. And basically, I want you to see this. God has already answered his prayer. You know, he prays his prayer. He's already answered his prayer. You know, but he could not be delivered until he was humbled. He had to humble himself. He had to sit down. And in his humility, then, in his utter weakness, then he receives a blessing. So then, this is Jesus' response. He says, and he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. Now, you had to imagine how embarrassing this had to be. Your name is Jacob. Jacob means trickster, twister. And you've been wrestling with me all night. But he admits, my name is Jacob. I'm the trickster. And he says to him, he says, Your name shall be no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and you have prevailed. You've struggled with men and with God. And Jacob prevails, he endures, and he has to be humbled, but because he is humbled in this moment, then he calls him a prince. Do y'all see that turn? He calls him a prince after he's humbled. And I know that it's real popular for us to call each other queens and kings, but I want us to see something. You see something. You're not a king or a queen or a prince or a princess until you humble yourself. And I think for a long time we've talked about us being king's kids and kingdom kids, and you are. But the true benefit of being a king or a queen's kid is by walking in humility. Christ didn't come to be a king. He was the King of Kings. He was the Lord of Lords. But before he ever wore a crown or anything, we haven't seen him wear a crown. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father. But he humbles himself. He washes feet. He serves the others. He stands up for the little guy. He humbles himself. And I think before we try to find identity in titles and positions, you want to uplift somebody, humble yourself. And I want to also say this: humility is not always a lowly place, because there are some arrogant janitors. There are. And then there are some humble CEOs. Humility looks like saying, although I sit here, I am no better than anyone else. Although I sit here, I realize that God has already ordained this, and I'm going to follow his lead. Although I have this leadership position, I'm going to submit to the leadership in my life. That's what humility is. All right, here we go. 29. And Jacob asked, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he says, why is it that you ask for my name? And he blessed him there. So he says, why do you want to know who I am? I can't really disclose that because I'm concealed. I'm Jesus in the flesh, but I can't really tell you that because that'll cause some problems. I'm not supposed to be here yet. Verse 30, he says, and Jacob called him at the place of Peniel, that is, the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life has been preserved. Jacob has had not just one or two or three encounters with God, but he's had this encounter with God. And his encounters with God did not mean anything until he wrestled with God. And the sad part is, for some of us, that is our reality. Some people are not going to come into saving faith until they wrestle with God. Some of us will get it right off bat. Some of us will be like John the Beloved, and some of us will be, more of us will be like Paul, who had to go through some stuff, had to wrestle. Some of us will be like Jacob, and will have to wrestle. But I want you to know this, and I want to make this abundantly clear, whether you are like John the Beloved and you just chase the coattails of Jesus, or you are like Paul and you're a little stubborn, or you're like Jacob and you have to wrestle, that God is still waiting. He still has a heart that not only wants you to be saved, but wants a relationship with you. That wants to walk with you and wants to talk with you and wants to see you be your best self. And I know that we live in a day and age where everybody's talking about this philosophy will help you, and if you burn this sage, this will help, or if you come over here and do this yoga, or you do all these things. I want you to know that the best route, your best mental health, your best place is in the arms, in the safety, the constant pursuit of a God who is pursuing you. You know, there's nothing like being in a relationship with both people are pursuing each other. There's nothing like it. Whether it be romantic or it be a friendship, where both people are pursuing each other, it works better. It's more fulfilling. All right, last three verses. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. That's the face of God, for I've seen God face to face, and my life has been preserved. And he passed over Peniel, and the sun rose upon him, and he limped upon his thigh. He's going to feel that limp for the rest of his life. Verse 32. Therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew with the shank which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that he drank. And that's I think it's called mispah, which is a Jewish tradition where they will not eat tendon. And they won't eat that portion of any animal because they're remembering how he wrestled all night long, but finally get some clarity about who God is. Y'all pray with me. Gracious God, we thank you for your grace, your mercy. God, we thank you that you are always pursuing us, always chasing us, always looking after us, God. We thank you that even if we mess up 30 million times, God, there is another chance, another opportunity for us to get it right. God, we thank you for your abundant grace and mercy. God, we thank you that you are the God of new beginnings. That you're the God that even after we wrestle, you bless, you anoint, and you give us gifts that are greater than anything that we could ever purchase. Father, I pray a special blessing over all of our viewers, both in the room and watching online. God, we just pray that you would touch them in a mighty way, in a special way. God, we pray that you would hold them and that you would cradle them in the care of the tender care of your arms. And God, that you would give them a bold faith to trust you, to follow you, and to go and do the thing that they've been afraid to do. Lord, we thank you. We do praise you. It is in the sound, the sovereign, the very most sufficient name of Jesus Christ that we do pray. Amen. Y'all be blessed, and we will catch you next week.